Newsflash, a new study suggests that depression is not a chemical imbalance, and there's no evidence that lack of serotonin causes depression. What does this mean for you? Stay tuned. A disclaimer before we get started, since we are talking about depression and its treatment. Whatever I say after this point does not mean that you should not take antidepressants or that they don't work. In fact, according to the research, the best treatment option we have right now is drug treatments prescribed by your doctor in combination with psychotherapy. So follow your doctor's advice. It may save your life. A few weeks ago, a new study came out that suggests that the link between serotonin and depression is weaker than we thought, and it was all over the news that depression is not actually caused by a chemical imbalance. A bunch of psychology channels have rushed to make videos on this topic, but if only someone had told us sooner. 2020. Whoa. Okay, so this isn't news to anyone who studies neurochemical mechanisms of depression, which I happen to do. The idea that low serotonin causes depression and the best way to get better is by increasing it has been a wild goose chase for researchers for decades. So when this story started to spread across news outlets everywhere, our video was rediscovered by a lot of folks and we started to get new comments, so I thought it was a good time to revisit this issue and address some of their questions. I'll briefly discuss what we mean by causes of depression. I'll talk about what this new study tells us, mention some alternative drug treatments for depression, and I will end by sharing some scientifically demonstrated ways that you can protect and restore your mental health. Now, if you haven't seen our original video, I encourage you to check it out. I'll put a link in the description. Basically, I outline the reason why the cause of depression is not chemical, and that people don't randomly one day have a drop in serotonin and become depressed. The chemicals didn't cause the problem, and while drugs can help in the medium term, they alone are unlikely to fix the problem. While it's nice to believe that depression is not a personal failing, and it's not, I presented scientific studies that show believing depression is purely because of a chemical imbalance can actively cause harm by convincing people that everything is out of their control, which induces learned helplessness. The chemical imbalance story is not only incorrect, it keeps people depressed. Again, I encourage you to check out that video for the full details, but I stick by my statements that depression is not a chemical imbalance. A couple of commenters misunderstood this to mean that I was pointing the finger at them for being depressed. So let me be clear. It's not a chemical imbalance, nor is it a personal failing. You are just a human with unmet needs, and the cause of those unmet needs may have been things outside of your control. However, you can overcome depression, and there are proactive steps you can take to get better. Not getting better or struggling to get by is not your fault. My co-presenter on this channel has a mantra. It's not your fault, but it is your problem. And her wisdom applies here. This isn't about blame or shame, but instead about finding the right support and the right tools and making sure you know damn well that you're going to get better even if it seems impossible right this second. So how did we get here in the first place? Well, like all the best science, we stumbled onto it by accident. Drugs developed for other purposes, like treating tuberculosis, were found to have antidepressant side effects. Since those drugs worked by boosting serotonin levels in a variety of ways, this became the main target for new antidepressant drug development. The most popular type you've probably heard of is SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which leave serotonin in the synapse between neurons longer, giving it more chances to bind to receptors before being recycled back into the cells. Researchers spent a lot of time and resources trying to figure out what the connection is between serotonin and depression, and they had a lot of trouble. After all, the drugs make serotonin increase within hours of taking the drugs, so why does it take weeks to have antidepressant effects? Why does serotonin appear to work? Does it even work? And why does it only seem to work for some people? All of these questions evaded researchers for the past 70-odd years. Meanwhile, clinicians were happy to try to do whatever they could to help their patients based on the evidence we had. Drug companies are happy to supply the drugs, and the chemical imbalance explanation became a popular way to make people feel less ashamed of being depressed. Okay, so what does this new study tell us that we didn't know before? I can answer some of that because I read it. Since this paper's a systematic review, it didn't collect any new data, but instead put together all the knowledge on the topic that they could find to analyze together in one study and look at the overall evidence and the results of the science that's been done so far. They looked at a bunch of studies on how serotonin might work, including the levels of serotonin in the body, the ability of serotonin to bind to serotonin receptors, the protein that moves the serotonin out of the cell, called the serotonin transporter, and all the genes that are involved in this stuff. The authors conclude, our comprehensive review of the major strands of research on serotonin shows that there is no convincing evidence that depression is associated with or caused by lower serotonin concentrations or activity. Most studies found no evidence of reduced serotonin activity in people with depression compared to people without, and methods to reduce serotonin availability do not consistently lower mood in volunteers who are not depressed. In other words, if there is a chemical imbalance, it doesn't seem to be related to serotonin. Now, the big thing that stood out for me in their report is the counterintuitive finding that actually long-term exposure to increases in serotonin may actually reduce serotonin levels over the long term. Now, the body tries to compensate for the chemical imbalance created by the drugs by lowering production of serotonin in the body and reducing the number of available receptors. Thanks, homeostasis. Homeostasis, keeping the balance since, before we started measuring time. So you're probably wondering, well, how does this help depression? I have no idea. And neither does anyone else right now. But it makes a lot more sense than the previous model with regard to issues like why it would take weeks for the drugs to actually have an effect. Now, the overall effectiveness of serotonin-based drugs has been questioned in recent years. The authors of this study suggest that the perceived effect of these drugs might actually be some sort of placebo effect. After all, belief is a powerful thing. Now, I'll suggest an alternative, that the effects may not be the result of serotonin per se, but maybe there's another system that is affected by serotonin. Different neurotransmitters, circuits, and systems of the brain affect each other, and one system can boost or inhibit the activity of other systems to balance out and regulate each other. Now, serotonin has been shown to be correlated with opioid activity, so it's not hard to imagine that long-term exposure to serotonin drugs and a shifting homeostatic balance there might change your opioid tone, the day-to-day level of opioids and receptors in your body. You might not see differences in serotonin for those who are depressed, just like they found in this study, but the downstream effects on other systems may have an effect. In that case, those other systems would be the proper areas to target for antidepressant treatment. There are some other treatments that have been emerging as alternatives to serotonin-based drugs, especially for treatment-resistant depression. These are things that we're still learning about, and doctors are still determining the safest way to implement them. But I mentioned opioids, which some studies have shown to be promising and relatively low risk using non-addictive drugs that are already available. Electroconvulsive shock therapy is also a commonly used way to treat treatment-resistant depression, and despite what you might have seen on TV, it's not painful and can have rapid antidepressant effects. Ketamine, which is a well-known, powerful anesthetic, is widely available and promising as a fast-acting treatment to reduce depression. A form of it, called esketamine, has been developed as a nasal spray, Spravato is the brand name, which the FDA approved for treatment-resistant depression a few years ago. It is still a dangerous drug that has to be administered by a doctor's office, and you have to stay there for a couple hours afterward for monitoring. But all of this is to say that there is hope. We are getting better and better drugs to aid in the treatment of depression and help people get back to being themselves. Okay, so those drugs are chemicals. Doesn't that mean it's still a chemical imbalance? Well, here's the thing. Even if we did discover some chemical in the brain that 100% turned depression on and off, it would still be true that the chemical didn't cause the problem. It may help you get back to functioning in the short term and medium term, but finding those unmet needs I mentioned earlier and dealing with those is an important step in the path to recovery. Antidepressants can help you bridge that gap between where you are now and where you want to be. At the beginning of the video, I promised to mention some ways to recover and protect your mental health. This video is getting longer than I thought, so I may make a full video on these later with more details and citations and so on, but I'll highlight a few things now. As I've looked at the science over the past 20 years, I've been creating a list of these, what I call pillars of mental health, things that research has shown to help with your overall well-being. The first is social support. Like it or not, we humans are social animals, and we evolved to exist in groups with others. Finding some sort of social support, finding your tribe, can be a major step toward better well-being, even if it's just a community gardening group. The second pillar is exercise. As much as we might not like it, or it's hard to find time to fit it into a busy schedule, regular physical activity is both rewarding and protective of physical and mental health. Now, I know it can be tough to do anything when you're depressed, but if you can manage it, it's worth the effort. Even light physical activity, like you would get helping out at a community garden a few times a week, can be helpful. The next pillar is sleep. Making sure you get enough sleep and getting quality sleep can make a huge difference. Insomnia, sleep apnea, and anything else that erodes your sleep should be near the top of your list to treat. Being tired after a long day in the community garden can... Okay, maybe gardening isn't your thing. But the point is, you might be able to find just one or a few activities that really cover a lot of bases. So, I wanted to make this video as an update to our old video and describe this new study that's all over the news, but also to inject a little bit of hope in there. And even though depression isn't your fault, there are pathways to getting better. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button, subscribe to get more videos on all things psychology, and until next time, keep thinking. I guess it's nice to see that all these other psychology channels with more subscribers than us are finally catching up to something that we said 2 years ago. I guess not everybody can keep their subscribers on the cutting edge. Who knows, maybe in 2 more years we'll be right back here when the story breaks about how community gardens are the secret to treating depression.